welcome to this special NDTV panel from the 9th Synergia Foundation Conclave in Bengaluru. And the topic we're discussing is one that's dominated social and technological conversation over the last couple of years, artificial intelligence. Well, most agree that the genie is out of the bottle, but is it possible to contain the genie? If yes, should we be containing the genie? Should we be scared of it? Should we not be scared of it? Now, as I mentioned, I have a very special panel here with me this evening, starting with Lieutenant General retired John Shanahan, who was the first director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center of the US military. Also with me, Dr. Ivan Aid, Assistant Professor of the Royal Danish Defence College. Thank you for being here with us. And Siva Ganesh, who's giving us the corporate voice, the Indian voice, perhaps give us the Indian context as well, Global Head of the TCS Cloud AI Unit. Thank you three for joining us. My first question, General, is this. A lot of us who are common and who don't understand technology that well are often scared, and when we hear comments like AI is as much a threat as climate change, we're extremely worried. Now, A, should we be as worried as we are right now? A. And B, is there a way to contain the genie if it's already out of the bottle?
Yes, I want to go right back to where you started this, was the description of the genie. The genie can be a good genie or it could be a bad genie. And how do you know which kind of genie it is? Humans should decide what kind of genie the AI genie is going to be. And what do I mean by that? What I get probably most concerned with is this idea of technology determinism, that technology just will take on a life of its own, just leave us be as technologists, and we will come up with AI that's for the benefit of society. And also we focus on maybe long-term existential risk, ignoring very real short-term risks that are here upon us right now. So this idea of human agency matters so much to the future of AI. 1,000, 100,000, 1 million individual decisions that humans will make will decide about the future of AI. And if I could just give one more example. If you were to poll physicists in 1950 about the threat of nuclear weapons, were they existential risk? I don't think you would have any question. Every single one of them would say that's an existential risk to humans, existential risk. Some would say it's a necessary evil to deter war. The challenge we have with AI is if you ask that same question of 5 of the world's leading AI experts, you'll get 5 different answers, where that long-term risk, short-term risk is. So what I would say is this will require humans at every level to get much smarter on AI, to demand answers on AI, not only from the technology community, but from policy leaders who should have just as much a say in where this technology goes as the technologists do. That's kind of what I would say is the best way I can frame that.
Very interesting comments that you make there. Dr. Ivan, is it then the process of the human being adjusting with a new technology? And how are we going to go about this?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I fully endorse your comments on describing AI as a genie. Is very appropriate because it can be what we make it into. It holds tremendous promise, but at the same time also tremendous risks. And that makes governance extremely important in terms of whether we can actually harness the potential destructive effects. And I do think it does come down to defining and ensuring the human role in the use of AI. How do we do that? And as the panel that I was formerly in pointed out, there's no one size fits all. It depends on the type of system. And the general and I are in the military domain, and the risks and promises there are different from those in the commercial uses of AI.
So that's interesting. Taking it out of the military context where there is possibly a greater understanding of what it can or cannot do and how we want to use it, bringing it to a civilian common context. Right. What do you see the challenges are?
Firstly, I like the word Genie because it kind of rhymes with Gen AI, which is probably what we're all talking about. So that's an interesting coincidence. But jokes apart, I think in the civilian context, the way this whole tsunami has engulfed us the last 12 months or so has been both from the enterprise context, societal context, and also the end consumer context. So what's happening is the speed of adoption is unlike any other technology we've seen before. And therefore, for compliance, legislation, rules, governance to catch up, it's urgency and velocity that is needed. I think the rules of the game are just about starting to shape up. And to the point that was made earlier, certainly when newer things get launched from an industrial revolution perspective and beyond, there's always some trepidation as to what the perils are juxtaposed against what the promise has to offer. I think we are at that stage of infancy or nascency. So as long as the guardrails, as we tend to call them, and the rules of the game evolve and keep pace with the volatility and the dynamic nature of what's unfolding, I think in the long run, it should be good generally for all concerned.
As you mentioned that in terms of engaging and evolving the rules of the game, are we in control of how technology is evolving itself at a global level? And I'm not just talking from a country-specific point of view. At a global level point of view, are we aware of where technology is going? And are we framing regulations or ability to control for the future, or are we bringing out something for today which may be relevant tomorrow?
I think it's a very dynamic estate, like I said earlier. So there are two parts to what is getting framed and unfolding right now, I would say on a global basis, because everything's within reach of everybody thanks to the internet and the cloud these days. So the control part for today is what is being focused upon. But I think everyone has an eye on the immediate future, if not, say, 10 years from now, as to this is a technology that looks at cognition, intellect, if not intelligence, getting also abetted by, AGI as we tend to call it now. And therefore, it's important to wear a thinking cap as to what the future may hold and devise the necessary checks and balances right now. Yeah. Are we there yet? Certainly not, because it is moving very fast. And you've got to play catch up or be one step ahead of it by the day, literally.
I believe that the willingness to try and fail fast is really important here. We're not going to get the regulation right today because we don't know where it's going, but we're going to have to keep trying, and we're going to have to be focused on constantly adjusting to the technological development.
So just to give a context from a common person's point of view, somebody who doesn't understand technology, one of the things that's extremely scary about AI is deepfake. For instance, we may have to have a disclosure that this conversation is not a deepfake conversation, it's a real one, right? Now, how are we going to evolve society and people? One side is your legal framework and regulation. One side is your technological framework and regulation. On the third side is societal awareness. What would be the most challenging aspect of that?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point to raise, because as much as we want to talk about the long-term risks, this idea of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation is upon us right now. It's affecting all of us globally. And I like the way you framed it. There is a technology piece to this. So we have to work between the policy people and the technologists to come up with some ways of whether it's watermarking or proving authenticity. There are different ways that are under discussion. But more importantly, and I think we've seen some of this from the Baltic nations, that Ethan can talk to better than I can, the Nordic and the Baltic nations, is a comprehensive education and training program for the entire society. Because it's not that these technologies are so different than people all of a sudden are not believing something or believe something that's fake. They were predisposed to have those views. This just makes it easier for them to find that echo chamber online and say, that's what I thought, that must be right. So there's an education and training piece. And I would say a critical view, a skepticism to be able to determine. What I worry most about is people stop believing anything. And I think for society, that's a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, there are fascinating books, articles written on this echo chambers and how it is. Ultimately, it's a human flaw that gets exponentially magnified because of technology, right? So how does a country like India deal with it? Can there be a global framework, or should there be an individual country-specific framework where then we create an ecosystem which is global?
Well, I believe we should have both. I don't think it's one thing or the other. We do need an overall global framework, but each nation should also craft their own governance that is tailored to fit that stage of technological development that matches that nation and the special operational, and I'm talking military here, but also societal circumstances of that particular nation.
in terms of not just the legal frameworks, in terms of technology, should there again be a global effort to understand the technology aspect and bring it down to a country-specific law?
Certainly. And to supplement what was said, I think indeed having global standards and checks and balances, and then having adaptations of that locally, because cultures are different, national preferences are different, and so on. You've got to have that combination coming as well. What's interesting now, because you began this segment of questions with the authenticity, the veracity of everything, right? I think that's always been an issue ever since we've known civilization, right? There's always been the real physical world artifact and how that is codified and represented in some other form or in computer systems over the last 100 years. What's adding more peril right now is it's not just transactional information, but it's also multimedia, if I may. So voice and video and imagery and all that. As much as sophistication developed in proofing all the other forms of transactional abstraction, so will this evolve too. A time will come for that. It's just that there's a neck and neck race going on between the validation and verification and the evolution of probably malcontent.
So Shiva, one of the interesting aspects is that until, or perhaps, let's say a decade ago, the technocrats and the technologists were on one side, the policymakers were on the other side. They were people who understood society. The legal frameworks were different. Now, this AI and the technology aspect, if it's a problem, if it's a bad genie, it comes from the techno world. And if it's a good genie as well, it's coming out of the technology world. And the solution also perhaps has to come from the technocrats, right?
Yes.
Have we been able to bridge the gap between the technical people who understand AI and the rest of the society, which doesn't perhaps understand, and perhaps the fear comes out of a lack of understanding as well?
No, I think that would be true. The fear comes from a lack of understanding. Let me give you a parallel in the software engineering life cycle, as we tend to call it. When you saw Agile as a phenomena coming in not too long ago, it forced business and IT to work together. The notion of co-working was born more than ever before. Likewise here, ironically, I think the folks who frame the rules, compliance, legislation could perhaps benefit from this very tech itself, for which one needs to devise guardrails. So that's the beauty of it. It's quite recursive if you come to think of it. And I think that convergence is inevitable, and it will eventually lead to something much more steady state, if I may.
Ajay, you were pointing out to the different societies responding to AI, different nations responding to AI differently.
Yeah, so it's an interesting, if you were to do a public, or they have done public opinion polls on attitudes towards AI, generally optimistic, generally skeptical or pessimistic. If you look at the numbers right now, there's a stark difference where China is more optimistic as a society than the United States is, mainly because the news tends to be very negative about AI, where a country like Singapore or China, and I would suggest probably India as well, is looking at what can AI do for good? How do we get the benefits of AI for society? My first time to India on this trip, this is an AI explosion waiting to happen. You have all the technical talent here, right here in Bangalore. I think you'll come up with solutions that people aren't even thinking of right now because the talent is here. And you drew a very nice mental picture for all of us of two circles, policy circle and a technology circle. It needs to be a Venn diagram, but I would add one more circle underneath that. That is the citizenry. They have to be involved in this. You have the people doing the governing, but the governed should have a say in the future of this. And I think that will shift public opinion attitudes if the individuals, if the average citizen feels like they're part of that future in that discussion.
And what's the experience in Europe?
Well, I come from a relatively small country with a very different demography and a very different, say, a commercial profile. Our challenges are, although we are highly digitalized, we are looking at a situation where we need to build a closer bridge between government, industry, and commercial sector, and citizens. And since I'm from the military domain, that's what I focus on. And one of our biggest challenges is the hesitation to work closer with industry, to bring these entities closer together. there's partly reason for that. We're very interested in keeping, an arm's length principle to industry, whereas we're also beginning to realize, well, industry has the capabilities that we need. They can translate many of the problems for us, even though they also have commercial interests. So we need to come closer, stop being so afraid of working together, and we're not there yet in Denmark.
That's a fascinating point to get you in, Shiva. Both in terms of business, where is it going? I mean, in terms of what's emerging from a business point of view, is it just as a tool and how we're going to profit from AI, or is it more about, look, this is something extraordinary that we are sitting in. We can't just look at profit motive here. This is something that we need to look at from a much more larger point of view if we're going to make it sustainable.
Yes, that's a great point. There's many dimensions to what is unfolding with respect to this whole technology. One is that whatever we've been running as enterprises, businesses, and whatever processes exist even perhaps from a governmental, societal perspective, those could be entirely reimagined thanks to this technology. So reimagination is very much part of that game. Second is maybe this totally new ways of working, doing things which were hitherto not possible because you just didn't have this technology. So that's another dimension. I can tell you everyone's excited in the sense of the word of not wanting to miss out. So experiment, play around with it, and try and figure how to utilize it for larger good. And just as we've seen how the internet, the cloud, how cellular technology has allowed for so much of seamless networking and communication, so much of society being near real time now. By the way, who writes a letter anymore, right? That kind of thing, it is bound to happen. And that's actually the exciting.
Joked with me when I said email. They said it's no longer email, it's just mail.
Yes.
There is no other form of
absolutely. I do hear sometimes they take children to post offices for an excursion to say this is how we used to do stuff. So
it's quite fascinating. It's a new word, and I want to touch upon also the global geopolitical context. But before I get that, Shiva, from an India point of view, what would you believe is the crucial challenge? Because we're sitting in Tech City, right? Here the conversation is dominated by AI. There are several people out there. But taking it down to the villages, making an entire population aware of it, would that be a fascinating challenge for a country like ours? Because ultimately, it's my mind and my opinion that is being governed by AI. And how long before people actually realize that this technology, and they'll have to be given the choice of whether it's good or bad for them to decide that. How are we going to go about that?
No, I think there are a few factors to consider here. One is the training and the data sets, right? And the local languages for which it needs to be configured. I think that is an element that has to be given due importance. The second is thanks to cellular connectivity and the advent of smartphones, which are affordable, the tech is readily available on the phone now. So just like payments has gotten revolutionized in a very, very short span of time, I think having that device at the edge, as we tend to call it, consume this and thereby reach literally every consumer, whether you're in a main city or not so, doesn't matter. Getting immersed into it, if I may, I think that's the way to spread the adoption.
In fact, your entire digital public infrastructure is built on AI tools. I mean, sometimes we don't, when we're worried about AI, we don't really realize that we're not going to be able to live without it. I think we've got quite so far ahead in the curve. But I want to bring the geopolitical context. And what's concerning is we're in the middle of two wars, and you're seeing an extremely polarized world. In this polarized world, and given that both of you study defense and military very closely, and you've served as well, sir, what would you believe is the worst fear that we have at the moment when we look at this technology that's unleashed, it's available everywhere? What do you think would be the most worry, or possibly the most positive aspect of having AI in this generation?
So a couple of things. First, on the most negative, it is this idea of an existential fear. Could this trigger, say, if we had autonomous nuclear weapons, that we end up with a war that completely blows up the earth, because that's the worst fear. But day to day, I think the average person gets a little bit more worried about, do I have a job tomorrow? Is AI going to take my job away? Because that's real to a lot of people. So we have to have a conversation that convinces people you will keep your job. You might have to adapt in your job. You will use AI and you'll be better than you were before AI, but you're not going to take your job away. That's not going to convince everybody, but that's the start of the conversation. I think more importantly on the AI for good is medicine, pharmaceuticals, day-to-day is just, I think what you're getting at is we treat these technologies as magic, and all of a sudden we don't even think about them anymore because they're in our pocket. They just become the normal way of doing business. We have to let people know that really is AI, and here are the positive, here are the beneficial aspects of it, but you're going to have a say in the potential harmful effects as well. And I'm glad you said the world geopolitics. For the last 30 years, we let sort of technology run amok. Now, we have to recognize that innovation is a form of hard power and soft power. It's geopolitical, it's geoeconomics all together. That is going to inform this idea of a techno-economic competition between powers across the world. That is something we have to think a lot.
It's a fascinating that you say, the techno-economic competition between the powers of the world. How are we going to see this evolve in the near future?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with your points there, Jack. And I think that in addition, I would say that one of the fears or the negative scenarios would also be lack of attention to the potential influence of competitor states. You know, if we're not aware of how technology can be used to influence, to create deep fakes, to create false information and spread it, combined with the fact that people tend to be rather lazy when it comes to actually searching multiple sources for their news and all that, you know, we might end up in a situation where one country could significantly influence the population of another.
In fact, somebody was just mentioning about conversation, right? There's been several studies of how internet actually increases disparity in society because the one who can speak the dominant language, the one with the better connectivity gets his opinion much better heard. And usually the one who can do that is the one who's already richer and possibly at a better state. So it sort of explains it. But going beyond that, and I think you touched upon an extremely important point of AI and jobs, which is very important from an Indian context, which is one thing that a lot of people worried, including journalists, are extremely worried about. How worried should be in a country like India, which has an enormous human population, which needs work?
So I think there's elements of the value chain which can be, if I may, AI-fied, and it lends itself to consuming this technology, which means we use the word adoption and adaptation, I think, earlier on in the conversation. Those aspects, should they go away to AI, those who adopt and adapt to newer tech can free up that time and put it to better purposes of research, innovation, strategizing more. So more value addition, if I may. Net, I think it's the old thing of whether automation will totally take away jobs. No, it doesn't. It allows for existing jobs to be performed more efficiently and from a humanistic point of view, maybe more humanely, thereby unlocking labor, resources and cognition to do more value additive stuff. And I think that's the way you got to look at it.
Fascinating thoughts from all three of you. We're coming to the end of the conversation. I started with Genie, and I'm going to give each of you 10 seconds each. Is it a good Genie or a bad Genie?
Right now it's a good Genie, but it could become a bad Genie, so everyone should demand a voice in the conversation.
You make sure that the Genie is good.
It has the potential to become a good Genie.
But at the moment?
At the moment, I would say it is both.
Okay, it's both.
Good Genie as long as governed.
As long as governed. And we are yet to learn convincingly how we're going to govern. And that's really the key challenge.
Yes, agree.
Well, that's all we have time for on this conversation. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully you will understand AI and also understand the implications that it brings to human society as a whole.